So this is race mode. We are going to check this out. This is a new game mode, and it is intended for 2 to 4 players. The intention is to race other players. There's not really a mode to race against the computer. But let's go ahead and I'll just demonstrate 5 laps and 5 enemies. Go ahead and just use some normal tanks. And we'll just grab a normal stage. So, okay. So what we got here is checkpoints. I gotta go to 1, which I've already done. And then I gotta go to 2. There's a little firework effect when I do that. Then I go to 3. And finally 4. And you see the little, I have little lap indicators on top of my tank. You can also see up here that I now have 1 lap completed out of 5. What happens when you get hit by an enemy is you get stunned for a bit. So now I've got that shield telling me that I'm good to go again. I do have little lap indicators above my tank to let me know, well, it's not lap indicators, it's checkpoint indicators. So it lets me know how many of the laps I've completed, or I keep saying laps, it's the checkpoints I've hit. When I hit all 4, they flash and kind of reset. Now the enemies, when I attack them, I actually get bonuses or upgrades for each one I defeat. And it says it, a little pop-up text comes up and tells me whenever I get an upgrade. Now you may notice that every time I complete a lap, what that setting was at the beginning for how many enemies, that's how many enemies are going to, how many enemy spawn points will be at the end of the race, the most that they will be. Now I don't have time to like pull up a menu and choose my upgrade, so I just have it randomly pick an upgrade for me. But as I complete another lap, there should be another enemy spawn point coming in, right there. And yeah, so I do have to avoid enemies, although it won't take long for enemies to be kind of just a background feature as I get faster and more powerful. Ideally, of course, the other players would be getting in my way and competing with me in how to get to where we're going. You can see right here, this 4th checkpoint also just changed to a kind of black and white. It's supposed to look like a checkered flag, but it's really just kind of like stripes, I guess. So maybe that could be improved. But it is that way because I'm on my final lap. I'm at 4 out of 5. So as soon as I cross that, the race is over. We got the total time taken. We got my shots fired, enemies destroyed. On my stats right there. We've got, it just says points, but that's really, you know, how many laps I completed. And as we go back in here, if I change it, I can change enemies to 0. So if you want to do a race without any enemies at all, you can do that. If I have it set to 1, I believe it'll just be 1 spawn point the entire game. Yeah. Pretty sure it's set. I've coded it to be that... It's coded in a way that the final lap will be the maximum number of enemies that you set, but it'll also like gradually raise the number of enemy spawn points throughout the race if you've got, you know, more than you need. So, for example, because it's set at 1, it's only ever going to be 1. But if I were to raise it to something else, then it would choose how often to add more enemies. It's kind of a neat little formula, I can show you that. But I'm just kind of showing off here the concept that the enemies aren't going to grow in number even though I have played more laps. So yeah, same thing. I do have a new record screen for race records. It's similar to the battle records screen where it's just kind of what you've done. There's no like goal here or anything to like improve really. Unlike the campaign where there's like fewest shots, least damage, fastest time, none of that is in race mode because there's no there's no player versus game situation here. It's just player versus player. So it's just how many races you've completed with each tank, which gives you a use percentage, laps completed by that tank, which goes along with, I guess, if wow, so 4X Tank has entered completed a lot of laps, but not won a whole lot in comparison. So interesting numbers. We got a win percentage there. So yeah, these percentages are just calculated based on these other values that are saved. But as we go in here, we could change this to, let's see, we do 2 laps and 4 enemies. I'll just go ahead and change my tank up just to be different. So it's going to start with 2, and it should then go up to 4 after I complete 1 lap, because there's only 2 laps that are going to be done. And I'm using just small numbers for a quick demonstration. Yeah, 2 more spawn points are coming in. And of course, the spawn points are randomized, but the checkpoints are also randomized. So if I go to the same stage twice, the location of those checkpoints will all be different. And the lap count can go as low as 1 and as high as 20. In fact, there's a new achievement to just simply complete a 20-lap race, just to get an idea of what it's like to do a kind of a marathon feeling thing. You can do it with 0 enemies if you want, but that actually will take you longer to do because you won't be gaining upgrades, so you won't be moving any faster. So really, it's in your best interest to have at least 1 enemy, if not more, to get more enemy kills faster. The way that the upgrades work is that I did start out with it being just completely random, but then I changed it so that you instead would go through a list of upgrades. So the way that you get upgrades now is that there is a list that is randomized at the start for each player. So each player gets different upgrades in different order, but they all do ultimately get the same upgrades if they max out their upgrades. Which I think it's hard to do if you're doing like a short race, but if you're doing a 20-lap race, that's not hard to do. So maybe there's some balancing that needs to go in there. I kind of did pick values that would be good for a long race, but not too long. So maybe that's also part of the meta, in a sense that you know your stats are going to max out at some point, so you don't want to spend too much time going after enemies, and just kind of focus on maneuvering around as fast as possible. Yeah, so it doesn't really take that long to complete 5 laps. It's pretty short, actually. Only a minute and a few seconds. But again, if you have more players, you probably have more competition, which would slow down the race. Actually, what's important to consider is whether or not you have team attack on. So by default, you know, team attack I think is, friendly fire I should say, is off, but if you turn it on, then the race becomes interesting in a different way, because now you can shoot your opponents and your upgrades matter towards how good you are at fighting each other. But you've also got that invincibility shield after getting hit, so you can't necessarily just sit and tank an enemy, or yeah, you can't just sit on an enemy or a fellow or opponent's player. You can't just sit on them and keep them from moving, because they do get invincibility after getting hit. So yeah, there is all of that to consider. I guess talking about how this was come up with, my brother actually just gave the idea of like, hey, what if you came up with like a race mode? And at first I thought, okay, well, let me think. If I just make it to like first player to get to a single point, and then maybe that point moves to a random spot, so it's just kind of like a never-changing random place to go to. But I think, I don't know, I think it's less fun to do that. See, the point, I think, of a race having a track that you complete multiple laps on is that, especially with a random track, as with this game, is that the first time you go and do a lap, it's kind of a, well, I think I'll try going this way kind of thing, and after a couple of laps, you probably have found, like, the best way to do it. Of course, with a game like this, there's no real steering physics. You can kind of move in whatever direction you want freely. So in terms of making a real racing game, it's not great to do that. So I think it's fine to just have randomized locations. The reason I brought up the movement is because what it really means is that you can't like improve your technique in driving around the track. It's just a matter of which way do I go, how I get around all the enemies and my opponent. There's all that stuff to consider, really. So this mode really only works with other human players because you gotta be able to mess with each other. A simple CPU would just look for you to shoot at and try to go take the shortest path to the next checkpoint, whether there's an enemy in the way or not, without some really advanced, complicated coding on the enemy's thinking process, but really not worth it for just an extra game mode when it's not the main draw of the game. Let's go ahead and take a look at that code here. So right here, this is how you spawn in more enemies. First of all, we're in race mode, and we're not on the title screen, and we're not paused or anything. Menu level does say none, so we're in game. So spawning in more enemies. If the instance number of spawn points is less than the ceiling of race intensity, which is the number of enemies that you set in the settings, times winner, this is how many laps the player in first has, plus 1, divided by laps, but divided by race laps, which is the total laps of the race. So you're dividing by the number of laps done by the lead player. You're taking the number of laps by the lead player divided by the total laps of the race, plus 1 on the winner, because you can't just wait until the race is over, because 1 out of 1, like a whole number, a non-fraction whole number would be if the player in the lead has completed the number of laps that the race is set to do, in which point you would never get the last enemy to spawn in. So you need a plus 1, basically be 1 ahead of the lead player's lap count. Divide that by the number of races. That gives you a percentage of how many enemies you need. And the race intensity is the number of enemies that the game is set to. So that percentage put to the ceiling, that just means round it up. So always round it up. So if we're like at 0 enemies, regardless of lap count, anything times 0 is going to be 0. But if we are at, say, race intensity 1, then it's 1 times 2 divided by 1. And then ceiling, you're going to be at 100% from the start. So first lap, you will be, because winner, if you're just starting the race, this is actually 0, because you've completed 0 laps. Whoever has completed the most laps is still 0. So you add plus 1 to make sure that if you're on the first lap, there will at least be 1 enemy if enemy is set to anything but 0. And so yeah, it's the same regular enemy spawn point. It randomizes its location when it's created, and that is how the game mode was created. I copied a lot of the the code for determining when a battle mode is ended. It's just another condition for ending the mode. And so yeah, otherwise the coding was fairly simple. The checkpoints are randomized in a similar way to how the enemy spawn points are randomized. So I was able to copy that code over from survivor mode. So yeah, it actually wasn't too hard to make, which is probably why I was able to make it in a day. But yeah, let me know what you think of this in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.